Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Listen, if we even think you owe us money, you won't know what hit you. We'll put liens on everything you own. Raid your bank accounts, retirement fund, pension. You'll open up your paycheck and cry because we'll already have the money.
Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Everybody wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? You call low-cost airlines. They specialize in cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, cheap car rental rates, and with a best price guarantee. If you want the lowest prices on your airline tickets or other travel services, call now. That's right, call. That's the only way to get these rates. Experts are standing by 24/7 to get you the cheapest airfare and hotel rates available. So don't wait. Call now.
This episode of This Week Explained is brought to you by the good folks over at Fresh Roasted Coffee and Positively Tea. Okay, so let me tell you, I've been loving their coffee lately. They have this super fun coffee quiz on their website that helps you find the perfect blend. I took it, and it matched me with this smooth medium roast that's just so good. And if you're more of a tea person, don't worry. They've got you covered with Positively Tea. They've got everything. Organic, fair trade, single origin, you name it, they have it. Seriously, whether you're a coffee or tea drinker, you're going to find something you love. So, listeners, head over to the link in our show notes, click it, and it'll take you to a special offer on the coffee and tea. And when you get to checkout, use the promo code this week to get 20% off your first purchase. Welcome to This Week Explained, the podcast that cuts through the noise to help you make sense of our ever-changing world. I'm Tiana, and each week my co-host Kervin and I break down the biggest global events and explain what they mean for you. This week, we're diving into the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, U.S. strikes against the Houthis, and the geopolitical context behind the fight for the Panama Canal. We've got a lot to unpack today, so let's dive right on in. Let's start with the highly anticipated phone call between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The call resulted in a limited ceasefire agreement, but it's already raising questions about its effectiveness, Russia's intentions, and obviously the broader implications for Ukraine, Europe, and the United States.
Yeah, that's right, Tiana. So this call was being framed as a step toward peace, but actually when you dig deeper into it, it's clear that there's a lot more going on here.
Well, what exactly was agreed upon during the Trump-Putin call?
So the main outcome here was this limited ceasefire agreement. Putin agreed to stop attacking energy infrastructure. That's like the nuclear power plants in Zaporizhzhia, also the electric grid. And the idea here is that this would serve as a starting point for broader negotiations. That includes a potential ceasefire in the Black Sea, and then eventually a full peace agreement that's going to end the 3-year war.
Well, I mean, that sounds promising on the surface, but there's already skepticism, so what's the catch?
Yeah, the thing here about these so-called concessions from Russia is that they're anything but genuine. I want to break it down a little bit here. So Putin proposed a ceasefire in the Black Sea, but here's the catch here. There really hasn't been any fighting there since 2023. Why? Because Ukraine's drone superiority has kept Russian naval forces in check, and that's made the region relatively calm. So what's the real play here? A ceasefire in the Black Sea is just going to allow Russia to regain control of shipping lanes that Ukraine has already liberated. So it's a calculated move to undo Ukraine's hard-fought successes, all while dressing this up as diplomacy from Putin. And then there's the promise to stop attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which that's great, right? Everybody would agree. Let's stop attacking that. Mm-hmm. But it is spring. So temperatures are warming up. No one's really using the heaters. We know in Europe, it's not really air conditioning to be used. So Russia doesn't need to weaponize the conditions right now. And honestly, they've already failed in their own winter offensive. So what this really does is it ties Ukraine's hands, and it prevents them from targeting Russian oil refineries. Those are the critical lifeline for funding Moscow's war machine. So that's why I want to talk about this and break it down, because when you look at the bigger picture, the so-called agreement is heavily skewed in Russia's favor. It limits Ukraine's ability to strike back while giving Russia the breathing room it needs to regroup and reassert control. So it's not diplomacy, it's strategy, and it's one-sided.
So Putin is essentially using these agreements to strengthen his position while appearing to be cooperative.
Exactly. So it's a classic Putin move. You package a strategic advantage as diplomatic concessions.
Okay, so let's talk about Russia's recent offensive to retake Kursk. How does that factor into these negotiations?
Yeah, so that push to retake Kursk is just basically a power play. By regaining control of this territory, Moscow is putting additional pressure on Ukraine to accept those territorial losses as part of any future peace deal. So it's a way for Putin to strengthen his hand at the negotiating table and then force Ukraine into a defensive position.
And how exactly does this affect Ukraine's stance in the negotiations?
So it puts Ukraine in an incredibly tough position. So they're being pressured to make concessions, and big ones. We're talking about potentially ceding territory, including areas that Russia annexed back in 2022, which, by the way, still to this day, the international community does not recognize as legitimate. And then on top of that, they're being asked to put their NATO ambitions on hold. But look, here's the thing. Ukraine has made it clear they will not sign on to any agreement without firm, enforceable security guarantees. And I honestly can't blame them. They're deeply skeptical of Russia's willingness to honor any deal, and history has given them every reason to feel this way. So it's not just about diplomacy. For Ukraine, it's about survival, and they know the stakes couldn't be any higher right now.
So what about Europe? Like, how are they reacting to the Trump-Putin call and these developments?
Look, we've said it the last few weeks. Europe is at a crossroads. On one hand, Eastern European nations like Poland and the Baltic states are likely to push for ramped-up support for Ukraine because they know they're next. And they see any concessions to Russia as a dangerous precedent that can embolden Putin past Ukraine and into their territory. On the other hand, some Western European nations, particularly those focused on economic stability, may pressure Ukraine to accept the deal just to end this war. They're concerned about the long-term cost of a prolonged conflict and the impact that's going to have on energy security.
Okay, so what about security guarantees for Ukraine? What do those look like?
I mean, another great question there. So we know NATO membership is off the table for now. Russia has made that one of its main red lines. And look, I want to reiterate this. It was a long shot for Ukraine to even be approved into NATO before this conflict. Now with the destabilizing effects of the conflict, I think it's highly unlikely they'd ever be approved. So let's talk just security guarantees. The ones that could take the form of bilateral agreements with countries like the U.S. or Poland, or even a multilateral framework involving European nations. There's been some talk of deploying European peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. Right now, that's highly contentious with Russia. Russia already rejected a UK-led proposal for peacekeepers, and their presence actually could escalate tensions if it's not carefully managed. I, for one, am still in favor of offering Ukraine Article 5 protections without NATO membership as the key deterrent to further Russian aggression.
All right, so let's zoom out for a moment. Like, even if a ceasefire deal is reached, does this mean that the war is over?
No, not at all. This is just a start. A ceasefire deal is likely just a temporary pause. That's not a resolution that's going to stop the war. Now, Putin's ultimate goal of controlling Kyiv and subjugating Ukraine has not changed. A deal is just going to give Russia time to regroup, time to rearm, and then prepare for future offensives.
So this is more of a strategic delay for Putin than a genuine step toward peace.
Yeah, I really think so. Look, Putin's playing the long game, and I think any agreement would be a tool to buy time and not an end to his ambitions.
Then, while we wait for these discussions to move forward, what should we be watching for in the coming weeks?
Okay, that's good. There are a couple of things really to watch in the next few weeks. So, what are we going to hear from Europe? Are they going to remain united in its support for Ukraine? Or will those Western European nations be divided, and that division emerges between Eastern and Western European nations? So, other thing, how's the Trump administration going to navigate the balance between pushing for peace and ensuring Ukraine's sovereignty and security? I really am going to keep an eye on that. And then even with a peace deal, if they do have a ceasefire deal in place, Putin's actions in the coming months are going to reveal a lot. They're going to reveal whether he views diplomacy as the genuine path to peace right now, or if he's just buying time here.
It sounds like this situation is far from resolved. So for now, let's move to the Middle East, where we have been warning about the critical state of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. So, Kervin, let's start with the most recent events. Overnight, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza reportedly killed over 400 Palestinians and injured hundreds more. What is driving this escalation?
Yeah, I mean, here we're back at it again, right? Talking Israel, Hamas, and the suffering in Gaza. And this particular escalation is part of Israel's broader strategy to pressure Hamas into releasing the rest of the hostages. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has been clear that these strikes are aimed at securing the release of all hostages, whether they are alive or dead. And this comes after weeks of stalled negotiations and a ceasefire that Hamas appears to have used to regroup and plan further attacks.
So it sounds like the ceasefire, as we predicted, wasn't as productive as some might have hoped. What went wrong this time?
Yeah, look, it's not the outcome that anyone here wants, and it's not something that we had hoped for. But honestly, the writing was on the wall from the start. We talked about it every single week. It was going to fail at some point. Now, on paper, the ceasefire did look like a step toward de-escalation, but in reality, it gave Hamas the breathing room it needed to reorganize its forces and gear up for future operations. Meanwhile, Israel tried to turn up pressure. They put sanctions on civilians in Gaza.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah,
That's who needs to be punished further.
Right.
The civilians.
you can't go around saying, well, Hamas is using human shields, so they're going to care that the civilians in Gaza aren't getting electricity. I mean, they're not getting humanitarian aid.
They're not going to care at all.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, well,
Two things can be false at the same time.
we've got a new take on it. Okay.
Yeah, look, none of that worked. None of these sanctions on the civilians did anything to break Hamas' resolve. Anyone could have predicted that. And if anything, it added more fuel to an already volatile situation.
And now Israel has decided to return to military action. Who's shocked? Are you shocked? Are we
Who's shocked? Are you shocked?
We
Yeah.
shocked? Are you? Are you shocked? Are you over there?
No.
Back? Are you shocked? Okay. Well, what? Okay, so what is different this time compared to previous rounds of fighting?
Yeah, look, there are several factors. I think some people would say there's nothing. They're doing the same thing that they were doing.
That's what I was about to say.
Right, but now we're at the end of the Joe Biden presidency now, right? That ceasefire agreement came about during the Joe Biden administration. It was during that transfer of power between former President Joe Biden, current President Donald Trump. So this is the first time that it is under the Trump presidency. This new administration has given Israel more leeway, more military support, so they can increase their military actions. Also, look, Hamas is weaker. They are in a weaker position than before. The smuggling routes that they had have been disrupted. Key leaders like Mohammed Daif and Yahya Sinwar, they're no longer alive.
I love it when you say their names.
Sometimes I forget to go back to my old Arabic stuff, and I just say names like a white boy from the South. But I'm going to make an effort on this podcast to do the right thing for the listeners.
Because I love it.
Thank you. So yeah, those two are no longer alive. That's the top of their leaders, and so finally, now, this is the last thing, is the IDF can focus solely right now on Gaza without the added pressure of a northern front with Hezbollah.
So they're like, let's kill 400 civilians and then sanction the civilians who are just caught in the middle.
They sanction the civilians first, and then I know that doesn't. That was just a little bit of.
That's just not even funny.
It's not even. No. So, like I always say, what would Israel say? So, I saw this coming about earlier in the week because there was reports from Israeli intelligence that they had gotten wind of another October 7th style attack from Hamas if the ceasefire had gone any longer. So Israel would say their current strikes...
But if they're weaker and they don't have the leadership, are you sure it wasn't just rumors or just something used to justify this attack?
That is another angle. Because of the classified nature of the intelligence, we don't know what they have. But there was a moment... Benjamin Netanyahu was in a meeting and he was quickly rushed to a bunker.
Also could be smoke and mirrors.
Could be as well. That goes back to the trust issues, right?
That's
what I'm saying.
Issues.
We don't have trust issues with anyone.
What are you talking about?
In
America?
On the world stage. No, I'm saying you and me.
Oh.
On the world stage, when people do things and then they say, well, this is why we did it, you and I typically go, show me the proof.
That means we have trust issues with everybody. That you just said we don't have trust issues.
No, I thought I was trying to say we do. Well, you and I have trust issues with everyone.
With everyone.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Yes. Sorry, that came out.
It sounded like you said we don't have trust issues. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's all we do.
I appreciate you allowing me to clarify that. Because, think about our talks about Putin every single time. Hey, we just did the ceasefire negotiation talk.
Yeah.
Hey, he wants to bring peace. No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't trust that he wants to bring peace. I trust that he wants to take over all of Ukraine and then go after Finland and Poland and Sweden.
Restore the glory of Mother Russia, man.
So this is, we can go back and forth on not believing what Hamas says. And
when anyone says, I don't believe Hamas either.
Yeah,
but
exactly. So we don't believe what the IDF says.
Attacking civilians.
Absolutely. And so all I'm doing here, you know how I do. I try to bring both sides of it, and I'm telling you what they're saying, and then I can clarify what I actually know. Yeah. In this, I don't know what the intelligence said, but the actions before...
It still had nothing to do with Gazans.
Right. It has. So Israel, they won't say this. Israel doesn't care about it.
This is where you think they're coming from.
Yeah, so my opinion, I know we've been hit a couple of times for being too opinionated, but I have...
We've been hit?
Well, you and I on the podcast will say.
Oh, I'm so confused.
That's an opinion. Stop with the opinion.
My brain is still fuzzy. I still have an upper respiratory.
You can't hear. Tiana's still sick right now, but she is powering through for you guys.
I have been periodically coughing into my duvet.
So what I was getting at there is that the IDF said, or actually Israel said that there was intelligence, right?
Right.
The actions leading up to that looked like they had intelligence that immediately Hamas was about to do an October 7th attack. And then you said, but what does that have to do with the Gazan, with people in Gaza, with the Palestinians? And this is my opinion. Anyone can say I'm wrong on this.
I'm about to.
But Israel does not care about Palestinians.
Oh, well.
You'll agree with that. That is my opinion, just by their actions and what they're doing. Yeah. I'm not going to say whether that's...
And the fact that they were okay with Trump moving Palestinians into other neighboring countries so that they could wipe it clean and rebuild it in their own image kind of thing.
Right. And I'm not saying that is, whether that is nefarious or... one is good and one is evil. What I'm saying here is Israel's sole focus is on the people of Israel, on the Israeli people. And so they are going scorched earth right now. And they did that after October 7th because of what they considered to be one of the most horrific things that have ever happened in Israel. And they never wanted it to happen again. And so when that happened, a lot of things they talked about a lot with, well, this was an intelligence failure. You didn't see it coming. So now Israeli intelligence is on high alert. So anything that's perceived as another attack like that, we're going to see actions like the ones that they're doing right now.
I honestly haven't even seen that reported widely.
The intelligence?
No, not the intelligence. I haven't seen anything about the strikes killing 400 Gazans.
Yeah, it kind of got brushed on because it was around the same time the call between Trump and Putin. And so then, tinfoil hat on again. Does Israel do all of this at that same time because they understand?
They know the press machine.
Yeah, it's going to be focused solely on one thing. CNN did a couple of reports on the Palestinians that were killed. There's also right now a ground operation going on in Gaza because Israel's trying to build a buffer zone between the border of Gaza and the border of Israel so that Hamas cannot perform that attack without Israel being alerted to it.
Right.
Like you said, it is. All of that is getting brushed under the rug because people are focused on Russia-Ukraine right now because we could be on the precipice of a peace deal. And if you remember, when Hamas invaded Israel and the October 7th attacks happened and then Israel went scorched earth, we stopped talking about, not we, but as a society, we stopped talking about Ukraine and Russia.
Everybody's fatigued.
It's war
Conflict fatigue.
And this is part of the issue with social media and the 24/7. It's not even 24/7 news. It is 24/7 discussions from people who don't typically. So in the 1800s, the people you're seeing on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok talking about all these conflicts would not be talking about this day in and day out, 24/7. They wouldn't
even know that it happens.
Most of the time they wouldn't know it happened. They would just work, go home, and be in your bubble. We've totally flipped that now. And
that's why everyone's mental health is in the dumpster.
Yes, and that's why we're trying to get BetterHelp to sponsor the podcast because we all need it, guys. But yeah, sorry, that was that's a tangent.
Yeah.
But I wanted to clarify a lot of things, especially my opinions on things. And so when I say something that sounds like a totally cruel thing that another person is doing, that's not really what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they feel justified in doing it because something happened to them.
Right.
So it's a reactionary reason. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what happened.
Okay, well, speaking of future attacks, you mentioned that Hamas used the ceasefire to reorganize.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of threat does that pose?
Well, I talked about the intelligence, right? It said Hamas already has plans for additional raids on Israel. So the ceasefire gave them that time to prepare. Returning to military action right now, they'll tell you it's to get all the hostages, but it's not just about the hostages. It's also a preemptive move to disrupt Hamas's ability to launch those future attacks. Israel sees this as a security necessity, and that necessity would be to prevent another wave of violence.
So what is the end game here? Is Israel still aiming to completely dismantle Hamas, or is this current offensive more about containment?
Look, that's the big question. And I don't have...
And honestly, would they just be okay with wiping Palestinians off the map if it meant killing every,
Right, and how do you justify that? And you say, well, everybody wants to wipe the Jews in Israel off the face of the map. And so your response to that is to wipe another type of person off the face of the map. I don't have an answer to that. I really don't. I will tell you that every day I look into it and I try to formulate solutions and I'm trying to think things through here.
Right.
And I just don't have a clear answer. Look, on one hand, Israel has the strategic advantage right now. With a weak Hamas, they do now have international support that they didn't have during the Biden administration. That is getting stronger and stronger every day. But on the other hand, completely dismantling Hamas, as we said, October 8th, the day after the attacks, is a monumental task. It didn't happen during this last major conflict. That was over a year of fighting. So it's unclear now if it's going to be achieved or if it ever can be achieved. So what we're likely going to see is a combination of military pressure and then targeted operations aimed at weakening Hamas to a point where it's not completely dismantled, but it can no longer pose a significant threat.
It sounds like the stakes are incredibly high for the entire region. So before we move on to our next topic, what should we be watching?
All right, 3 things to watch for very closely. First, does Israel's military actions lead to any progress in resolving the hostage situation? That's going to be a major indicator of where things are headed. Second thing I'm going to be looking at is how Hamas responds to this. Right now, they're firing some shots, but they have not escalated any further. Are they going to do that, or is there any hint of flexibility on their part to achieve another ceasefire? Final thing, I do think we need to keep an eye on how this impacts the ceasefire with Hezbollah. That's the situation going on in Lebanon, but also the broader situation in Syria. Israel is playing a role in that as well. The entire region is destabilized right now. And as we'll dive into very shortly, I think we're about to get to this part of it. The possibility of a larger regional conflict involving much of the Middle East is looming on the horizon.
Well, we will obviously continue talking about this as more develops, but for now, let's shift to the U.S.-led strikes on the Houthis in Yemen. But before we dive in, we're taking a quick break for a message from our sponsors. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you turned 65 recently like me, it's important you find a Medicare Advantage plan that gives you the coverage you're looking for. But finding one can be difficult. The best thing I did, and I suggest you do the same, is call a licensed insurance agent and let them walk you through your Medicare Advantage plan options. There are so many benefits you have access to, so make the call now and let the representatives explain everything to you. Our licensed insurance agents can offer you a variety of Medicare Advantage plans. Plus, the call is free, the information is free, and there's no obligation to enroll. We're here to make it easy for you to select a Medicare Advantage plan that may work for your needs. Finding a Medicare Advantage plan can be easy if you do what I did. Make a quick call right now to learn more. Thank you. Call 877-476-1681. That's 877-476-1681. Call now.
Conservative investors. What does the name Reagan mean to you? Reagan was the ultimate conservative. We at the Reagan Gold Group consider ourselves the ultimate conservative gold company. Do you as a conservative investor see the storm clouds of chaos and uncertainty approaching? We do. The stock market hates uncertainty, and there is lots of chaos on the horizon. High inflation, unsustainable debt, and political tensions are rattling the markets and creating volatility. Does your portfolio have an anchor in this storm? You have car insurance, homeowners insurance, and life insurance. But what about your retirement savings, your 401k? We urge all fellow conservative investors to learn about the one asset that could help keep your nest egg from cracking under all this economic pressure: gold. Call the Reagan Gold Group right now to get your free wealth protection kit and ask us how to get up to $15,000 in bonus coins.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back, listeners. As we said before the break, we are discussing the escalating conflict between the United States and the Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. Over the past week, the U.S. has launched a major bombing campaign targeting the Houthis, with the stated goal of protecting international shipping in the Red Sea. But as with most conflicts in the Middle East, there is a bigger picture here, one that involves Iran and its network of proxies across the region.
Absolutely right, Tiana. So the immediate focus is on the Houthis. This campaign is actually part of a broader strategy to counter Iran's destabilizing influence in the Middle East. That has been a persistent issue since even the early 2000s.
Well, can you break down the situation in Yemen for us? What's the driving conflict and what's at stake for the U.S. in its involvement?
Yeah, so let's start from the top. The U.S. has launched over 30 airstrikes in Yemen since this past Saturday. That targeted Houthi leadership, missile storage facilities, and other key assets. And it's part of a new campaign under the current Trump administration to stop the Houthis from attacking commercial shipping in the Red Sea. That's a critical waterway for global trade. Now, the Houthis have been targeting ships in the region since late 2023. That was shortly after the Israel-Hamas war kicked off. Now, while those attacks paused after a ceasefire in January 2024, the Houthis recently threatened to resume them, citing dissatisfaction with the level of humanitarian aid entering Gaza.
Well, I kind of get that.
Yes, and it goes back to, hey, you did something that we say was messed up,
Yeah.
so let us do something that's messed up.
Yeah.
Which is not attacking another military site,
Right.
but attacking commercial shipping vessels who have nothing
to do with it. Have
this.
nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so how has the U.S. responded to these threats?
Well, it's very different from the Biden administration. So the U.S. is taking a hardline approach here. Very interestingly, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stated that the campaign is going to continue until the Houthis stop their attacks. So this isn't a one-off event here. President Trump has also escalated his own rhetoric.
Shocker.
He's been warning that any Houthi attack will be considered an act by Iran, and that's going to be met with dire consequences.
So he's not even going to try to pretend like he's directly saying it's Iran who did this. No.
That's another difference from the Biden administration.
Yeah, they would never say that the Houthis were
Right.
tied to Iran. Or...
Yeah, they knew it, right? It's an Iranian-backed proxy, but it was always targeted attacks on the Houthis.
Kind of tiptoed around.
Yes.
So can you explain in a tangible sense how this differs from the previous administration? Like, I know they have also carried out attacks on Houthi sites in Yemen. So can you expand on that, what you just said?
And you're absolutely right. They did. Remember back in the summer of 2024? I think it was the spring of 2024. Now I can't remember. But the Biden administration did a bunch of strikes on the Houthis, on a lot of different military targets that the Houthis held. The shift is that the Biden administration relied heavily on coalition-based efforts with allies like France and the UK.
Do we still have those?
Okay. That was going to be my joke. We no longer have coalition allies. That's just not true. I hope you guys come here for the geopolitical news and the little bit of jokes in between to keep us all sane during some of these conversations.
We said we need therapy.
Yes, I understand. For those who are going, no jokes, do we really have allies? Yes, we do have allies. Forget what you read on the news and what, is publicly said by some people. Working behind the scenes, the French, the UK, Canada, they are all allies and they support, the U.S. supports them and we support, the U.S. supports them and they support the United States.
Yes.
But during these strikes on the Houthis, the Trump administration is acting unilaterally. They're using only U.S. forces to carry out all those strikes on Houthi targets.
Okay, so you mentioned Iran. How does this campaign against the Houthis fit into the U.S. strategy to counter Iran's influence in the region?
Yeah, so as you know, Iran has been a destabilizing force in the Middle East for decades now. They've been using their proxy groups like the Houthis to expand influence and then challenge U.S. interests. And the strategy actually dates back to the early stages of the U.S. war in Iraq, when Iran began injecting fighters and resources into conflicts across that country. Now, the Houthis, being one of Iran's key proxies, they receive weapons, training, and financial support from Tehran that allows them to sustain their insurgency in Yemen, which then threatens international shipping now. So by targeting the Houthis, the U.S. is sending a message to Iran that its proxy activities are no longer going to go unchecked.
Okay, but is this campaign likely to succeed? The Houthis have survived previous U.S. strikes, and they don't seem like the type to back down easily.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. The Houthis are highly resilient. They've weathered years of airstrikes, tons of it. So a few major campaigns during the Biden administration that we alluded to earlier. That happened in 2023. Then there was the one in 2024. And experts have noted that the Houthis are actually willing to fight to the last member of their movement. This is much different from a typical military fighting force. This makes the current campaign quite the gamble. So while the U.S. is hitting broader and deeper targets than before, there's no guarantee the Houthis are going to relent. And they could escalate attacks. If that happens, if the Houthis escalate, that's going to further destabilize the region. So the lessons here, I don't think we learned any lessons from the global war on terror. That big takeaway that I had after all of this, that trying to bomb insurgencies out of existence may not be the most effective approach to stop that insurgency.
Right. If anything, it kind of creates more extremism.
Yes. So then, and that's what people would say, that's how ISIS got started. So ISIS is one of the most extreme insurgent groups you'll ever find. We saw that in 2014. They were running roughshod through the Middle East, literally cutting people's heads off. They were not taking prisoners of war. They were using barbaric tactics to get their point across. That was because we bombed most insurgencies out of existence and a new one creeped up. We did it with ISIS. We got ISIS off the map. New insurgencies creeped up in West Africa, in Northern Africa, and then bombed those out of existence, and ISIS is now back on the map. So that's what I'm talking about with the lessons not being learned here with the way we're doing.
Okay, so let's talk about the challenges. What obstacles does the U.S. face in sustaining this prolonged campaign against the Houthis?
Yeah, and there are several, so it's a good question. First of all, the U.S. is dealing with limited precision weapon stockpiles. That's because over the past 3 years, the U.S. has been supplying munitions to Ukraine. We talk about this on the podcast with supplying munitions to Ukraine. And we really talk about it in a future conflict with China. We need those stockpiles for a future conflict with China. We also need it for this targeted strikes against the Houthis. We've also been supporting Israeli offensives in Gaza and then conducting our own, us being the U.S., our own operations against other Iranian proxies. So all of this has strained the defense industry's ability to keep up with demand. For example, during that 2024 campaign against the Houthis, the U.S. launched over 800 missiles. That included very expensive Tomahawk missiles, some other standard missiles. So sustaining another large-scale campaign could further deplete these resources.
And what about the regional context? How do other conflicts in the Middle East factor into this?
The Middle East is a tinderbox right now. None of the conflicts are really going away. You have tensions between Israel and Hamas that are flaring up again. That's because Israel's launching its largest assault on Gaza since the January ceasefire. Meanwhile, Iran continues to support its proxies across the region. They're using Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, as well as Syria. So the U.S. risks overextending itself by focusing too heavily on Yemen while also trying to deter Iran and also trying to support Israel and also trying to maintain its global posture against a competitor like China.
Okay, so what is the end game here? How does the U.S. plan to achieve its objectives? And what are the risks if it doesn't?
Yeah, look, the U.S. has made it clear. It's not about regime change in Yemen. That's not what the focus is. The goal is to protect freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and send a strong message to Iran. But the success of this campaign depends on several factors, one of which is the Houthis' willingness to even back down. If they don't ever back down, fight to the last man, that's going to take a lot of resources. So, if the campaign drags on, you strain the U.S. resources, you also distract the U.S. from other priorities like, deterring China in the Indo-Pacific, which everyone has said is the most important thing right now. But I do want to say this. Failing to do anything could embolden Iran and its proxies. And we see how that, if that happens, it's going to further destabilize this region.
And what about the decision to let regional commanders determine when and where to strike? How does that change the dynamic?
So that's another significant shift from the Biden administration. So the Biden administration centralized all of their decision-making in Washington, D.C. I, for one, my opinion again, think that letting the regional commanders determine when and where to strike is a good move.
Because they're the ones that are there.
Exactly. Because you're giving regional commanders more autonomy. It allows for a more flexible and aggressive approach. Who, just like you said, who knows better about the region than the regional commanders?
Right.
They would know what to do. Now, there are some pitfalls to this. It also increases the risks of escalation. You could have a rogue commander who doesn't care and strikes anywhere that they choose to. That could escalate things. And that would be especially true if that rogue commander inadvertently strikes a target of an Iranian asset.
You don't think they have like a set of parameters in place saying you have this much leeway, you just can't cross this line?
Absolutely. They do. But it's about interpreting.
Oh,
those.
Everything's open to interpret.
Exactly. When you get a bunch of lawyers to write things up, you can get another bunch of lawyers
to find the loopholes.
To find a loophole.
Well, it sounds like this is a delicate balancing act for the U.S., one with high stakes and no easy answers. So for now, I want to move to the Panama Canal, which is a critical waterway that is once again at the center of global tensions. I never thought this would happen, but here we are. There's a lot to discuss, from the U.S. military plans to Chinese opposition to a major port deal. So let's start with the basics. Why is the Panama Canal so important?
Yeah, look, it's one of the most strategically vital waterways in the world. The other is in the South China Sea. Now, as you know, I have talked a few times about how the invasion of Taiwan could go down. So there would be a blockade of the Strait of Malacca. And that area accounts for approximately 30% of global maritime trade. The Panama Canal accounts for about 5% of global maritime trade passage. So you can see why it would be important for the U.S. right now to try and control that. But look, it's not just about trade. It's also a key military asset. In the event of that conflict, the canal could be used to allow the U.S. Navy to quickly move ships between the different oceans. And that's why control over the canal has always been a geopolitical priority.
And that brings us to the recent developments. So let's start with the Trump administration reportedly ordering U.S. Southern Command to draft military options for the canal. What is going on there?
Yeah, so that's the big thing, right? That's what everybody's talking about. And you can see how there is now a much more narrow focus on China and the Indo-Pacific with this administration.
So what could military options look like in regards to the Panama Canal?
Well, it could involve anything from a defensive partnership with Panama's public forces, but it could also there could be a more aggressive option. That would be like forcibly seizing the canal. That happened. If not everyone knows, the U.S. did have Operation Just Cause in 1989. That operation was when the U.S. invaded Panama to remove Manuel Noriega. It's also, one could argue, one of the successes of U.S. regime change. Panama does have its issues today, just like any other country, but it's been growing its economy actually over the last couple of decades now.
So with that success and the burgeoning Panamanian economy, why would the U.S. even consider something like that right now? I mean, the first few years following Just Cause pushed Panama into poverty. Do you think that would happen again?
Yeah, I mean, it probably would. And there are so many second and third order effects that could really be devastating to Panama. But like I said, all of this ties back to concerns about China's growing influence in the canal zone. Chinese companies, particularly the Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison, currently control key ports at both ends of the canal. That's the Cristobal on the Atlantic side and Balboa on the Pacific. Trump argued that China was using this control to, quote, rip off, end quote, U.S. ships with high entry fees, and China would definitely use that canal as leverage in a conflict.
And for our listeners, can you explain why this is a problem that China, not China, they imply it's just Chinese businesses, but it's actually the government, right?
Yeah, so any company that works out of China, like this Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison, has a 1% control by the Chinese government. That is the golden 1%. That gives, due to their constitution, that gives the Chinese government, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, complete control over the company. So they can force the company to do anything that it needs it to do. So what does that do with the Panama Canal? In a conflict, China invades Taiwan. They block off the Strait of Malacca. If this Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison owns both sides of the Panama Canal, China would force that company to form a blockade on that canal, and that prevents U.S. naval forces to move quickly through the canal to get to Taiwan.
We'd have to go all the way around bottom of South America.
Yep, and that gives China more time to successfully control the entire island. So it's this very strategic game that's being played right now. It's not just about the economy.
Right. So that brings us to the BlackRock deal. Can you explain what's going on there?
Right, yeah. So earlier this month, BlackRock, it is the U.S. investment giant. It's also one of conspiracy theorists' favorite companies to blame for everything that happens.
I've actually gotten not recently. I remember years ago, like when we still lived in Louisiana, someone who I shall not mention send me videos constantly, prove like they would have like summits all over the world,
Right.
and I was like, shut up.
Yes. So the person that tried to assassinate Donald Trump, he was seen in videos that BlackRock promoted. The Las Vegas shooter, all of this stuff. So BlackRock is, like I said, to conspiracy theorists, they are this shady company that is trying to take over the world.
Very well might be shady.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's what conspiracy theorists say.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theorists would tell you they've been right about everything in recent history, from aliens to the pyramids to all kinds of everything in between.
Right.
So you have BlackRock here. They announced a $23 billion deal to buy those ports that CK Hutchison owns in Panama, along with its controlling interest in 43 other ports across 23 other countries. Now, the deal was seen as a way for the U.S. to regain influence over the canal without direct military action, and Trump even touted this as the U.S. reclaiming the canal.
Of course, he's got to take credit for it, But anyways, but it sounds like not everybody is on board with this deal, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you can figure out who's not on board with it. Both Beijing and Hong Kong officials have strongly opposed the sale. They've launched investigations into potential antitrust and national security concerns, and Hong Kong's leader, John Lee, has called for serious attention to the deal. Now, Chinese state media has also criticized it. They're claiming it's going to allow the U.S. to use the canal for political purposes, much like China is going to do, and then undermine Chinese trade.
Okay, so what about Panama itself? Like, how are they reacting to all this back and forth?
Now, they're in a very tough spot. The Attorney General has actually filed lawsuits challenging CK Hutchison's ownership of the ports. They call the Chinese ownership unconstitutional.
But didn't they allow for the sale? Or did China just come in and stake claim? I don't understand.
there's been a lot of debate back and forth through the Panamanian Constitution on whether that sale actually should have been able to go through. That means that there would be some talk about this current sale to BlackRock if it went through.
Right.
Is that unconstitutional as well? Shouldn't it be owned by Panamanian companies and then they take in the financial benefits of all of that? And this is all geopolitics, right?
Right.
So why does another country own all of these ports there? Well,
Very strategic.
strategically, when a country is down on its economy, sometimes they make some deals that look good in the present, but they're, like I said, second and third order effects that happen whenever that takes place. And in the future, we find out, well, that wasn't the best thing
Kind
to
of
be
the
doing.
like the Belts and Roads Initiative.
Right, the Belts and Roads Initiative. Go back to Ukraine. They had to remove all nuclear weapons from Ukraine because Russia was nervous that they were going to use those on
minerals.
Right, well, I'm talking about this is like in the 90s. So
way back.
one of the security agreements was that Ukraine would remove all of their nuclear weapons. And that was because Russia was nervous, and actually the whole world was nervous. An unstable Ukraine having nuclear weapons, not a good thing for the peace on in the world, actually.
But wasn't
on Europe,
Russia unstable at that point in time?
they were too, and they never got rid of their
they
their
had to
nuclear
keep
weapons.
their stuff. Okay.
So Ukraine got rid of their nuclear weapons. What happens? Russia begins to be aggressive towards Ukraine because they don't have anything to defend themselves.
Yeah.
So second and third order effects that we don't find out till the future. Oh, this is why Russia was doing that, or this is why the United States wanted to do this with Panama, or China wanted to take over these ports, or the Belt and Road Initiative, all of those things.
Okay.
Yes, like I said, they've got to figure out if this was even constitutional, because they've had this 25-year contract and they're just keep renewing it. Panama says, we haven't voted on that. We need to have some say-so in it.
So who's renewing it?
China.
How can China just renew it without
It's their
talking to
contract.
Panama?
They're saying, right, so that's part of these shady business deals that go down.
Okay.
Now, on top of all of that, Panama, you just brought it up. Panama is pulling out of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Oh.
So this is part of Panama trying to shift away from Beijing, and now the U.S. is trying to influence for our own purposes.
Right. That's a lot of moving parts, but let's go back to the U.S. for a moment. If Beijing blocks this deal, what does that mean for U.S.-China relations?
Yeah, that instantly causes chaos. So that's going to be a direct challenge to the United States, especially since Trump has made this a high-profile issue. Gordon Chang, he's a U.S.-China relations expert. He said that blocking the deal would not go down well in Washington, D.C. So does Kervin.
Smart. Gordon Chang and Kervin are smart.
Yes. It's not going to go down well, and it's going to escalate tensions even further. And that's particularly true as the U.S. and China are already clashing over trade, i.e. tariffs, technology. Those are the chips for various pieces of technology, and military influence in the region.
All right, well, speaking of trade, how does this tie into Trump's tariffs on China?
Another layer to the story. So Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. He said that Beijing wasn't doing enough to address issues like fentanyl trafficking. We talked about that about a month ago. China says they have been doing enough, and the U.S. should appreciate what China was doing.
By executing 4 Canadians.
Yeah,
I don't know if it had anything to do with fentanyl, though. I was trying to find out what kind of drug they were saying those 4 Canadians. I don't know, because the article I saw, they were being very secretive about the reasons. I just know they executed 4 Canadians.
Right.
For drugs.
And China's not going to put out
They were like,
the
zero
entire story.
tolerance policy for drugs. We don't care where you're from, who you're with, whatever, you're gonna die.
Yep, that's a sad reality in these geopolitical back and forths where We have real human beings, civilians, who are caught up in all this for no other reason. I mean, you could say, well, were they drug trafficking? Okay, they were drug trafficking. Does that mean you kill somebody?
Yeah. And also, what are the circumstances? A lot of people are forced into that situation, or, they don't have any other, I don't know what I'm trying to say right now. My friend.
No, I know what you're trying to say. That some people are forced into it, right? I mean, if it'd be like, let's say we go into the human trafficking conversation, and you arrest a young girl because she's a prostitute, but she's been trafficked. Why are you punishing the person who had nothing else? Like, she couldn't do anything else. Is that what happened here? I don't know. We don't know.
And they're not going to tell us.
And we won't know for some time now. But so that's on that track, the fentanyl track. Now, some analysts do believe that the canal could become a bargaining chip in these trade negotiations. So if China wants the U.S. to ease tariffs, it might have to make concessions on the Panama Canal.
Okay, so wow. This is more than just Trump-hyperbole, it seems. And with Panama's own legal challenges and shifting alliances, it sounds like this story is far from over.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of seemed, I think we talked about this, it kind of seemed like a one-off thing, like, what, Panama? Why are we even talking about? But when you dive deep into these conversations and find the nuance into it, you come away with a better understanding of this isn't just something that's being put out there for no reason.
It does make a lot more sense now whenever you think about the fact that, Chinese companies own the docks on both sides of the canal.
Yep.
And knowing that China owns, the 1% that can force them to do what they need them to do, especially during wartime. So
absolutely,
it makes a lot of sense. This is strategic and hopefully will also help the Panamanian people as well.
I do hope so at some point. And it also shows you the forward thinkingness of some of the people not in power, I wouldn't say in power, but the leaders of certain militaries who are forward thinking in this and understanding, if this goes down, we're going to have to do this, this, and this. Or we are going to have done, A, B, and C before it ever goes down to even stand a chance in this conflict.
Well, I am going to say I bristled initially.
I did too.
I was like, oh, Trump, come on, man. Please just let us take a nap. Like, I just want one day. But now it kind of makes sense. And I like how it's like he's letting China know, guess what, guys? This isn't over.
Yeah. And it was one recurring theme of every one of Trump's appointees during their the process, their confirmation process. The one thing that kept coming up, from Marco Rubio to Hegseth to Tulsi Gabbard, was China. China is the biggest threat. And I'm sitting here telling you, you know this, I'm just saying it here on this podcast. Over the last few years, that is all I have looked into, is how does a conflict in China play out, and how do the warfighters, the U.S. warfighters and the coalition forces in New Zealand and Australia defend Taiwan when China takes those aggressive actions. So they're all forward thinking on this, and it's a bright spot, I think. So it shows me that people are actually considering this and trying to do something about it.
Well, thank you for your insights, Kervin. Do you have anything else to discuss?
Nope, and I don't know if you can even talk much longer, so we'll wrap this up.
I appreciate it, but thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1, go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2, collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3, play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games, all for free?
Step 4, unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.